Let's go on a little trip. I want you to imagine a world with no cash, no coins, no banks, nothing. We're going to head back in time to a tiny little valley, population 10, to figure out a question that's actually huge. If we could just trade stuff, why in the world did we ever invent money?
And right here, this is the whole puzzle, isn't it? This quote sets everything up perfectly. We think of an economy and picture Wall Street and complicated charts. But what we're about to see is that an economy is something much, much more basic. It's human.
So picture it, this small, quiet valley, just a few huts circled together. In a place this small, you can't hide anything. Everybody knows who's pulling their weight and who isn't. The most important question they face every single day isn't about getting rich, it's about getting by. It's how do we all survive together?
And really, that's all an economy is at its core. Forget the jargon for a second. It's just the system a group of people comes up with to answer the real gut-level questions. Who's getting the food today? Who's fixing the leaky roof? How do we make sure we all have what we need to see tomorrow?
Now, in our little valley, people start to specialize. Not because someone assigned them a job, but because it just makes sense. You know, if you're the one who's best at fishing, you should probably do the fishing. You get faster, you get smarter about it, and you waste less time. And that efficiency makes life better for the whole group.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting, because not all goods are created equal. You've got Keto, the fisherman. What he brings in is super valuable. I mean, it's food. But that value is on a ticking clock. His fish has to be used now or it's worthless. On the other hand, you have Senna, the potter. Her bowl takes a lot of time and skill to make, but once it's done, it's useful for a long, long time. This difference between fast value and lasting value, well, it's about to cause some problems.
And here's the rest of our crew. You've got Asha, who gathers roots and berries, Mara, the hunter, and Daro, who takes care of the goats. Then there's Oren, the guy who makes the sharp tools that, let's be honest, everyone needs. And finally, there's Rin. Rin is the one who's always watching, always thinking, and always asking, wait a minute, why do we do it this way? Keep an eye on Rin.
All right, let's get into it. Before we can even talk about money, we have to understand where the idea of value even comes from. And it all kicks off with one simple trade. Keto has fish that are about to go bad, and he really wants one of Sina's sturdy bowls.
And just watch how this plays out. It's beautiful. Keto offers one fish. Sina thinks about all the hours she spent finding the clay, shaping the bowl, letting it dry, and she says, nope, not worth it for just one meal. So Keto, with his fish spoiling, sweetens the deal. A second fish. Now Sina's thinking, okay, I can eat one now and smoke the other for later. It feels fair. And boom, just like that, a price is born. Not from a rule book, but from two people figuring it out.
So what just happened there? What actually creates value? Well, it's this mix of things. It's demand, how badly Keto needed that bowl. It's scarcity, Senna doesn't have an endless supply of them. It's cost, the real time and energy that both of them put into their work. And it's risk. Keto's fish could go bad any minute. All of those ingredients get stirred together in that one little negotiation.
So that first trade? Easy peasy. It worked great. But what happens when life gets a little more complicated? What happens when the whole village is trying to trade all at once? Well, as we're about to see, this simple system of direct trading, barter, starts to get really messy really fast.
So let's check in with Mara, our hunter. She's had a successful hunt, she has fresh meat, which is super valuable. All she needs is a new spear point from Oren, the toolmaker. Seems like a simple swap, right? And nope, there's a problem. A big one. Oren doesn't need meat. He's all set. What he really needs is some rope to fix his shelter. So even though they both have something valuable, no trade happens. For a trade to work, you need what I call a coincidence of wants. I have to want what you have, and you have to want what I have at the exact same time. And that's surprisingly rare.
You can just feel the headache in this quote from Mara, can't you? What should have been a simple errand has turned into this crazy, multi-step quest. She's thinking, okay, so I have to find someone with a rope who wants a bowl, so I first have to find someone with a bowl who wants my meat. It's a logistical nightmare. And all the while, that clock is ticking on her fresh meat.
All right, problem number 2. This one's a real brain teaser. Naya, the local builder, just finished fixing Daro, the herder's roof. Daro is happy to pay her, but his main form of wealth is, well, goats, and that leads to this really awkward question.
Here's the thing. A whole live goat is worth way more than a simple roof repair. But what's Darrow supposed to do? You can't just give Nia half a goat. A living goat gives milk, it can make more goats, it's a value-producing asset. The moment you divide it, all that future value is gone. It's just meat. This is the indivisibility problem. Some of our most valuable things just can't be chopped into smaller pieces for payment.
Meanwhile, Rin, our observer, is noticing something else that's driving everyone crazy. With every new trade, a new price is set. 2 fish for 1 bowl, 1 rope for 1 hide, a basket of roots for some smoked meat. It's like trying to do currency conversion for a dozen different currencies in your head all at once. How many fish is a goat hide worth? Who knows? It's exhausting.
So after seeing all this chaos, the complicated trade chains, the goat problem, the confusing prices, Rin has this breakthrough, this aha moment. The valley doesn't need a better hunter or a better potter, it needs a better system. It needs, in Rin's words, a helper thing.
And Rin just lays it all out right here. The problem is that barter is heavy, it's clunky, you're dragging around all this risk and inefficiency. You might not find a buyer, your stuff might spoil, you can't make change, and you have to remember a million different prices. It's just hard. It's holding the whole valley back. And there it is, the solution. The trade helper is money. But look closely at this definition. This is so important. Money isn't valuable because it's shiny or rare. It's valuable because of a promise. It's a social agreement. It's a tool that everyone agrees to accept, not because they want the tool itself, but because they trust that they can give it to someone else later for something they do want. It's all about trust.
And you can almost hear the collective sigh of relief from the whole valley. Darrow immediately sees it. He could pay Nia the exact right amount for her work. No more awkward goat math. Mara could sell her meat for this helper thing and then go buy a tool whenever she felt like it. All the friction, all the heaviness just vanishes.
So, if you remember one thing from all this, let it be this. Money wasn't born out of greed. It wasn't about hoarding treasure. It was a practical invention, a piece of social technology designed to solve a very real set of problems. It's a tool created to help people cooperate.
But here's the thing about powerful new tools. They have consequences, unintended ones. This amazing invention solves the problem of trade, for sure, but it also creates a brand new possibility and a brand new problem. For the very first time, someone can store up value, pure value, that doesn't spoil or break. And what happens when some people get really good at collecting this new trade helper? Well, that's a story that's going to change their little valley
Of the Shell Bridge. So let's just paint a picture of this place. Life in the valley is pretty good. People are getting by, but there's this feeling hanging in the air, a kind of collective exhaustion. See, the simple act of bartering, just trading this for that, has become this huge, frustrating puzzle that's wearing everybody out. Imagine this. Good food is literally spoiling while people are running around trying to find the one right person to trade with, and the arguments over what something is actually worth, they're So in the middle of all this frustration, one person, Rin, asks a question that just changes the whole conversation. What if there was something else, a helper thing? Think about that for a second. Instead of trying to trade my thing directly for your thing, what if there was something in the middle? A helper thing that you'd be willing to take from me, not because you need it, but because you trust that someone else will take it from you tomorrow. That right there, that's the spark. And that one question, it kicks off this amazing, valley-wide brainstorming session. I mean, these folks don't have economics textbooks, right? They just have real everyday problems. So they start to design this trade helper from the ground up, based on what they needed to do to solve their biggest headaches. Okay, so rule number 1 comes from Rin, and it's a big one. It can't rot, because fish rots and meat rots. It's so obvious when you hear it. Their entire world revolves around this ticking clock of decay. So whatever this helper thing is, it absolutely has to last. It needs durability so it can hold on to its value and not just, disappear in a week. Then Darrow chimes in with this brilliant practical point. He says, and you can't cut a goat in half to pay for something small, or you ruin the goat. And he's totally right. A living goat is super valuable, but you can't just chop off a leg to pay for, say, a leaky roof. You can't make change. So requirement number 2, this helper thing has to be divisible. You got to be able to break it down into smaller bits for smaller payments. And then Oren, the toolmaker, he adds the final crucial piece of the puzzle.
and it should be hard to fake. He gets it. If this stuff is easy to make, or if you can just find it anywhere, then everyone's going to have tons of it, and it'll be worthless. It won't mean a thing. It has to have some scarcity. It has to be a little bit special. So let's just step back and look at what they figured out. Without even knowing the fancy terms for it, they basically reverse engineered the core principles of money. It has to last. That's durability. It needs to be easy to carry. Portability. You got to be able to split it up. Divisibility. And it can't be something everyone can just find. That's scarcity. What's so amazing here is seeing these big, abstract ideas come directly from solving super practical problems, like rotting fish and goats who can't cut in half. But, they didn't get it right on the first try. Of course not. Invention never works like that. So their first idea on the table. What about fish bones? They're small, they're easy to carry. Seems like a decent thought, right? Yeah, that was a big nope. Another villager, Sina, she immediately points out the flaws. First, they snap way too easily, so they failed the durability test. And second, they're everywhere, so they fail the scarcity test. I mean, if the local fisherman has one good day, does he suddenly become the richest person in the valley? It just doesn't work. Okay, back to the drawing board. Idea number 2, smooth river stones. Now, this one feels a little better. They're definitely durable, they're portable, and you can have lots of them, so they're kind of divisible. This might be it, right? But again, Oren spots the fatal flaw. They're everywhere. Anyone can just walk down to the river and pick them up. And if you can literally get your money off the ground for free, it has absolutely no value. It fails the scarcity test. Big time. The search goes on. And then, the turning point. Asha, one of the gatherers, comes back from a long trip, and in her hand, she's got something nobody's really seen before. Little, pale, shiny shells. And here's the key. They only come from a river bend that's really far away and hard to get to. They're durable, they're portable, and they are not everywhere. Now, this is where the real magic happens. Because think about it. You can't eat these shells. You can't build a house with them. Their value doesn't come from what they are. It comes from something invisible, a shared belief. It's the moment where everyone in the valley starts thinking, okay, I'll accept this shell because I'm pretty sure that someone else will accept it from me later. It's that collective trust that turns a simple, pretty object into a powerful tool. All right, so the valley decides it's time for the ultimate test. They're going to go right back to the original problem, Mara's problem, the one that kicked this whole quest off. Can these little shells actually build that bridge between what she has and what Oren needs? Let's see. And check this out. This is how it works. Instead of one direct trade that fails, it becomes a two-step dance. Step 1, Mara gives her meat to Senna, someone who actually wants meat, and in exchange, she gets shells. Step 2, Mara takes those shells over to Oren. Now, Oren doesn't care about the shells themselves, but he takes them. Why? Because he trusts he can use them later to buy something he wants. Boom, the gap is bridged. Problem solved. And it wasn't just Mara's problem that got solved. Remember Darrow and his goat dilemma? The guy who couldn't make change? Well, now he can pay Nia for her roof repair with just a small, fair number of shells. No goats have to be harmed in the making of this transaction. The divisibility problem is gone. Then, after just a few days, something really profound starts to happen. People stop thinking in terms of how many fish for one bowl or how many roots for one rope. Instead, everything gets priced in shells. It's like they've created a brand new shared language for value. The shells become the universal measuring stick, what economists call a unit of account. And all that complicated mental math everyone was doing, it just disappears. But look, this isn't a fairy tale where everyone lives happily ever after. This new tool, this money, it's incredibly powerful. And every powerful tool creates new and powerful problems. Sure, the shells made treating a breeze, but they also opened up a whole new can of worms, a new set of anxieties the Valley had never, ever had to think about before. And it's Mara again who asks the first really sharp, really scary question. If one person saves too many, do they get to command everything later? See, unlike meat, shells don't rot. You can save them. They're stored value. But what she realizes is that stored value is also stored power. If somebody manages to hoard a giant pile of these shells, does that give them power over everybody else? And just like that, the concept of wealth inequality is born. Then another person, Lena, points out something else critical. But time is not the same for everyone. What does she mean?
Well, those shells come from a place that's hard to get to. Not everyone has the time or the ability to make that long journey. So this new system, which was supposed to help everyone, might actually be giving a huge advantage to people who have more freedom and mobility. The problem of unequal access has arrived. So, faced with these brand new, complicated problems, the Valley does something remarkable. They create rules. They build their very first economic institutions. They agree that only these specific shells, the pale, hard ones from that one river bend, count as real. That stops counterfeiting. And they agree that if anyone finds a new patch of shells, they have to tell the whole group. That's them trying to manage the supply and keep things fair. They're not just using money anymore. They're actively managing it to protect the trust everyone has in the system. And that brings us to the end, summarized perfectly by Ren. Money, this incredible invention, helps trade, no question. But it also blows the doors open on a whole bunch of new, difficult questions. Who has it? Who can get it? Who can fake it? Who saves it? And maybe the most important one of all, who gets left out? Their invention solved one big problem, but it created a whole new set of social puzzles. And if you listen closely, those are the exact same questions we're still wrestling with. Imagine this. You move from a small, cozy valley where everybody knows your family, your history, to a huge, sprawling city where you're just another face in the crowd. All those old rules about trust, about memory, about how you trade, they're about to completely fall apart under the weight of thousands of strangers. Okay, so let's jump right into how our ancestors fixed this crisis, not with some kind of magic, but with something as simple as a lump of clay. This one line from a seller in the market, it just gets right to the heart of the problem, doesn't it? Back in the valley, your hands told a story. They were the hands of a good hunter, a trusted builder, a friend. Your reputation, that was your currency. But here, in this city, everything's different. You're anonymous. Your hands are just hands, and your promise is just a sound that gets lost in the noise. That's the challenge they had to solve. So let's go there. We're in a market in ancient Mesopotamia. You can almost smell the wet clay, the smoke from cooking fires, the goats. We're following this character, Rin, who's watching the whole system of trade start to wobble. The special shells they'd been using to make trading easier, well, they're not really working anymore. And you can just feel the tension in this moment. You've got a buyer and a seller basically in a standoff. These shells, which used to be this reliable thing, are now making everyone suspicious. Are they even real? Could they be fakes? I mean, when you don't know the person you're dealing with, you start to doubt the very tools you're using. This isn't just a simple argument. It's a sign that the entire system is starting to crack. And this is where it gets really serious. A potter just flat out refuses to take the shells. And why wouldn't she? You can't eat a shell. When things get tight, when the harvest isn't great and people get scared, they don't want a promise of value. They want something real, something that can actually feed their family. So the key here is that a helper tool, like a shell, only works when there's plenty to go around and everyone trusts each other. The moment that trust is gone, the whole thing just freezes up. This is the big aha moment for Rin. Back in the valley, the community's memory was basically the ledger. Everybody knew who owed who was good for their word, and who wasn't. But that kind of system has a limit, right? It just doesn't scale up to a city with thousands of people. There are way too many faces, too many deals going on for anyone's brain to keep track of it all. They needed something new. So, faced with a failing economy and a whole lot of fear, the community does something pretty amazing. They innovate. They get together and they invent their very first major public institution, a central place to manage all their resources. The goal? To bring back some order and hopefully some trust. So picture a big meeting around a fire, and it all just comes pouring out. Trade is basically grinding to a halt. They've got these huge projects they need to do, like digging canals or building walls, but they can't get everyone coordinated. People are legitimately terrified of starving, surrounded by thousands of others, but feeling totally alone. And it all comes back to that one huge question. How in the world do we trust people we've never met? And this is the next big hurdle. It's not enough to just build a storehouse. You have to get people to actually trust it. Some skeptic in the crowd voices the fear that's on everyone's mind. What's to stop this new place from being just as forgetful, or even worse, corrupt?
You can't just trade the flawed memory of one person for the flawed memory of a whole organization. You're going to need proof. And the process they come up with is just genius. So simple. First, you bring your grain. Second, it gets measured with a standard scoop, so no more arguing about amounts. Third, your sack gets marked with a unique seal made of clay, which proves it was accepted and keeps anyone from tampering with it. And fourth, this is the key. You get a little clay token as your receipt. This isn't just about moving green around. It's a revolution. It's a system designed to build trust in the process, not just in a person.
Now, this new system of tokens and seals, it ends up being way more than just a smart way to track grain. It's actually the bridge to something massive. Let's look at how this physical proof evolves into a permanent external memory for the whole city. Basically, the invention of writing.
Okay, it is so important that we get the difference here. Shells were a tool for trade. Their value is all based on the shared belief, this social agreement that they were worth something. But these new clay tokens, they're a tool for proof. Their value isn't about belief. It's a direct, physical record that a specific thing happened. A shell says, this is worth something. A token says, this proves something. It's a huge shift from social agreement to a verifiable fact.
Rin sees a scribe pressing these little marks into a wet clay tablet, and it just clicks. This is a breathtaking moment. Those physical tokens are now being turned into symbols. The city is literally building a brain for itself, a memory outside of any one person. They're creating a record that doesn't care who's alive, who's having a bad day, or who's being dishonest. It's a memory made of clay, and anyone can check it.
When Rin asks the scribe what he's doing, his answer is so simple and so powerful. Clay does not argue. Think about that. People argue, people forget, people lie. Clay just is. That simple idea is the entire reason writing was invented. It came from this really practical need to create a stable, neutral record that could settle arguments and let a complex society actually work.
So now that they have a storehouse they can trust and a way to keep records, the city can tackle another enormous problem. How do you fairly and efficiently pay hundreds of workers for huge public projects, like digging canals or building walls? The solution is barley rations. It's basically the world's first payroll system. Instead of some chaotic mess where a worker has to find someone who wants their labor in exchange for food, the city organizes it. You do your work on the canals, and at the end of the day, you get a standard measured amount of barley. It's a direct payment that you can take home to feed your family. And what's amazing is we know this actually happened. Archaeologists have found ancient clay tablets that are literally payroll records for workers, paid in beer and barley. So what you see emerging is this really sophisticated two-tool system. You've got barley, which is perfect for everyday local stuff. It feeds people, it's easy to divide up, and it's the foundation of the local economy. But, it's heavy and it can go bad. So for the big stuff, for long-distance trade, they use silver, which is measured by a standard weight like the shekel. It's easy to carry, it lasts forever, and a little bit is worth a lot. The city now has the right tool for the right job. All right. Now we get to what might be the biggest upgrade of all. This new tech, writing, doesn't just record things that have already happened. It can record what is promised to happen in the future. And this right here is the birth of formal credit and debt. You can just feel the emotion in this. A nervous farmer, his crop failed, he needs to borrow some barley just to survive. He promises he'll pay it back after the next harvest. But a promise you just speak out loud, it's fragile. So he begs the scribe, write it. Turn that fleeting promise into something permanent. This is about a deep human need for fairness and certainty, a way to make sure that the story doesn't change down the road. And this is Rin's final, powerful realization about this whole transformation. A promise, an obligation. It's not just an idea of floating between two people's minds anymore. It's now a physical object, a clay tablet, that you can hold, you can read, and you can enforce. The contract has literally moved out of our heads and into the physical world. But, and there's always a but, isn't there? With this incredible success comes a new, more abstract, and honestly, a much more dangerous problem. The system works. It creates order. It lets the city grow. But it also concentrates a ton of power into the hands of just a few people. Naya, the wise organizer, just hits the nail on the head. The second that a society agrees that the written record is the official truth, then the person who controls that record, the scribe, the administrator, the king, they become the one who decides what truth is. And that's the paradox, right? They solved the problem of trust between people, but they created a new, much bigger problem: how to trust the institutions and the people who run them.
And this leads to a whole new set of really tough questions. If you get rations for being a worker, well, who decides who's a worker? If silver is measured by weight, who makes sure the weights are honest? If your debt is carved into clay, what happens when a drought makes it impossible for you to pay it back? And maybe the scariest question of all, what if the person making the record just makes a mistake? Or worse, what if they lie on purpose? And that's where we're going to leave it. There's some incredible ingenuity. The cities solved the chaos of barter and the limits of our own memory. They built these amazing systems of accounting and payment and credit. But in doing so, they created a brand new battleground. The fight wasn't about whether a shell was real anymore. It was about who gets to control the rules themselves, who writes them, who enforces them, and who benefits from them. And that, well, that becomes the next great challenge in human history. In our last explainer, we saw humanity take this giant leap, moving from tiny valleys where everyone knew each other to these huge, sprawling cities full of strangers. And to make it all work, they came up with specialization, storehouses, and clay records. But this brand new world, well, it created a whole new set of headaches. So how did they start to fix all this? Well, let's get into it. Right. These were the big, looming questions. As the cities got bigger, the old ways of doing things, personal trust, remembering who did what, they just completely fell apart. When you're trading with a stranger, how do you know you're not getting ripped off? When people have to borrow to survive, what on earth happens if they can't pay it back? This wasn't some philosophy debate. This was real life, every single day. I want you to imagine you're our observer, Rin, walking through the market as the sun comes up. You hear this argument. One guy is practically shouting, his face red with anger, and the other is just cold. He points a finger at a little clay tablet. See, back in the valley, this wouldn't be a problem. The whole village would know who was telling the truth. But here, in a city of thousands, your memory means nothing. The only thing that matters is what's written down. And that raises a terrifying question. What if the record's wrong? This is the moment where a society has to literally invent a new way to trust each other. Economists have a fancy term for it. They call it an institutional framework. But all it really means is you need a system, right? A set of rules that everyone agrees on that builds trust between people who've never even met. It's the move from trusting a person to trusting the system itself. So what did they do? Well, they did something kind of revolutionary. They started writing the rules down. But not on some secret scroll hidden away. They carved them into giant stone pillars and put them right in the middle of the city for everyone to see. The most famous one, of course, is the Code of Hammurabi. All of a sudden, the rules about debt, about property, about payments, they weren't just someone's opinion anymore. They were right there in black and white, well, in carved stone. And this was a massive change in how people lived. I mean, think about it. In the valley, fairness was all about your reputation. Your name was everything. If you cheated someone, everybody knew by sundown. But in the city, that's just impossible. So fairness has to come from something else, from rules that apply to everyone, and from a system that can actually enforce those rules. It's a whole new way of organizing life. But you know how it is. You solve one problem, and another one pops right up. Rin sees a farmer at the big city storehouse, and the guy just looks defeated. He's not there to trade something he has. He's trying to trade something he will have. He needs help now, and he's making a promise about the future. And with that, a powerful and really dangerous new economic idea is born. A lender hears the farmer and steps in. You'll give him the grain, sure, but there's a catch. He wants more back later on. Now, to us, that sounds totally normal, right? But put yourself in Rin's shoes. This is a brand new idea. And the question is obvious. Why more? Why should the farmer have to pay back more than he borrowed? At first glance, it just doesn't seem fair. And this brings us right to this core economic idea, interest. See, it's not just a random fee. The easiest way to think about it is like rent. The farmer is renting the lender's barley for a season. The lender can't eat that barley, he can't plant it, he can't trade it. And on top of that, he's taking a big risk. What if the next harvest is bad too? Interest is simply the payment for taking that risk and for that time. And get this, the rates weren't small. We know from records in Mesopotamia that a typical interest rate on a grain loan was around 33%. Just let that sink in. You borrow 3 bags of barley to keep your family from starving, and next year you owe 4 bags.
It's an absolutely crushing amount, but when you have no other choice, it's a lifeline. So that's the key takeaway here. A loan is a trade across time. It lets people survive the bad years, it lets them invest in the future. It can be an amazing engine for growth and stability. But, as Rin is about to see, this powerful tool has a really, really sharp edge. A year goes by, the harvest fails again, and those lifelines from last year, they've turned into nooses. Rin overhears a mother's voice, just a whisper, but it's filled with absolute desperation. This is the brutal math of debt when things go sideways. If you couldn't repay, it wasn't just a bad mark on your record. It meant losing your farm, your tools, maybe even your own children to debt servitude. And here's where a personal tragedy becomes a city-wide emergency. Because if too many farmers lose their land, who's going to grow the food for everyone else? If families are being broken apart by debt, who's going to fill the ranks of the army to defend the city? Widespread debt isn't just a collection of sad stories. It's a genuine threat to the stability of the entire society. The whole system starts to wobble. So, facing total collapse, rulers came up with one of the very first big economic policies. We call it a debt jubilee, or a clean slate. The king would just stand up and decree that a whole bunch of debts were, poof, gone, canceled. And this wasn't necessarily out of the goodness of their hearts. It was a practical move to stop the whole economic machine from seizing up and collapsing. It's a debate we're still having today, thousands of years later. Okay, so they're working on these huge city-level problems like debt. But Rin still sees this little everyday problem that's driving everyone nuts. Down in the market, people are using bits of silver to trade. But every single time, it's a whole production. A buyer and a merchant arguing not just over the price, but about whether the silver itself is any good. Economists call this transaction costs. It's basically all the friction in a trade. It's the time you waste weighing the silver, the energy you spend arguing, the mental focus it takes to make sure you're not getting cheated. And every society, whether they know it or not, is always looking for ways to reduce that friction, to make things smoother and faster. And that constant push to reduce friction is what led to one of the biggest inventions in human history. For 1,000 years, people used silver just by weight. Then they created these complex laws to try and manage it all. But then, over in a kingdom called Lydia, around the 7th century BCE, someone had an absolutely brilliant idea. The genius of the coin is that it's so incredibly simple. It's just 2 steps, really. 1, you take a precious metal and you make a bunch of little pieces that all weigh exactly the same. 2, you smack an official stamp on it, a seal of approval from the king or the temple that guarantees its weight and that it's real. And what's the result? You kill the friction. You can just picture a trader showing these newfangled things to Ren. The appeal would be instant. Look, no more scales for a loaf of bread. The stamp says it's good. You just count them. It's fast, so much faster. Trade, which used to be this slow, careful negotiation, could suddenly be quick, casual even. But here's the final magic ingredient that makes the whole thing work. How do you convince everybody to accept these little stamped pieces of metal as valuable? The ruler does one simple thing. They announce that taxes must be paid only in that official coin. Suddenly, everyone, every farmer, every potter, every soldier, needs to get their hands on those coins, and that creates this universal demand. The ruler pays the soldiers in coins, the soldiers buy bread with the coins, and the baker uses those same coins to pay their taxes. It's a perfect, self-reinforcing loop. So let's just pull back for a second and look at the big picture. We've got 3 massive upgrades that society's figured out. First, law, creating public rules to make trading with strangers predictable. Second, credit, inventing a powerful tool to trade across time, even with all its dangers. And third, coinage, a brilliant piece of technology to slash the friction of everyday life. And as Rin looks out over this bustling, complicated city, he gets it. He sees how far they've all come. First, they just needed simple things, like shells. Then they needed records. Then they needed rules carved in stone. Now, they have coins that make everything fast, but they also have this system of debt that can literally pull a family under. He understands that every solution creates a brand new, even trickier problem. And that leaves us with one last, really big question to chew on. That whole system, this amazing invention of coinage, it's all built on a promise, right? The stamp is a promise from a powerful authority that this coin is what it says it is. But what happens to an economy when you can't trust that authority anymore? What happens when that promise starts to break? Well, that's a story for next time.
So, great to have you back. Last time, we saw this incredible journey for money, right? We went from clunky barter to easy-to-carry shells, and as cities got bigger, they needed something more. So they built these massive storehouses with records. And eventually, we got coins, stamped metal that was supposed to make everything faster and easier. But, as we're about to find out, sometimes the best solutions end up creating a whole new set of problems.
Okay, so let's set the scene. We're jumping into a new era, from about 500 BCE to 300 CE. And this is a time of massive growth. I mean, think about it. Trade routes are stretching across entire continents. Port cities are just jammed with people speaking dozens of different languages, and these huge empires are trying to manage the whole thing. The world is getting bigger and way more complicated, and the money that holds it all together, well, it's about to hit some serious growing pains. And it's right here, in the middle of all this action, that we meet our guide for today, Rin. And she shows up with a really good question. If coins were supposed to be this great invention that solved everything, why on earth are people still arguing about money all the time? That's the big puzzle we're going to try and solve today.
So to get some answers, Rin heads to the one place where money is literally screaming at you, a busy port. You can just imagine it, can't you? The smell of salt and spices, ropes creaking, the thump of crates hitting the docks. And right there, in the middle of it all, are three traders, practically shouting at each other. Each one is waving a different silver coin, totally convinced that theirs is the one with the real value.
As this argument is heating up, a calm voice cuts through the noise and calls them over to a little wooden table. This guy is the table banker, and Rin watches, confused, as he completely ignores the fancy stamps on the coins and instead places one on this tiny, delicate scale. And Rin, well, she asks the question that's probably on your mind too. Hang on, why weigh it? The stamp is right there. Isn't that the whole point?
The banker's answer gets to the very heart of the problem. He explains that every coin really has two values working at the same time. You've got the stamp, right? That's the promise from a king saying, I guarantee this coin is worth X. But then you've got the metal, the actual physical silver that's inside the coin. And in a chaotic port full of strangers, that physical reality, what you can actually feel and weigh, matters a whole lot more than a promise from some faraway ruler.
And what the banker's talking about here, this is a core economic idea. It's called commodity money. See, the coins back then weren't just symbols. Their value came directly from the stuff they were made of. The coin was the silver. So if the amount of silver was off, then the value of the coin was off, and it didn't matter what picture was stamped on its face.
So why couldn't people just trust the stamp? Well, there were a bunch of really good reasons. For starters, you had people who would clip the coins, literally shaving tiny bits of silver off the edges. Then you just had normal wear and tear. Over years, coins would lose a little metal. Of course, there were fakes, made from cheap metal with a thin silver coating. And here's the kicker. Sometimes the rulers themselves were the ones cheating, secretly putting less silver in the new coins they made. The scale, you see, was the only thing that couldn't lie.
And Rin starts to get it. All of this uncertainty, this constant arguing and weighing, it's a huge problem. But where there's a problem, there's also an opportunity. This whole mess has actually created an entirely new job, a new kind of expert who knows how to navigate the chaos.
See, the table banker isn't selling wool or wine. He's selling something you can't hold, certainty. He's selling trust. People pay him a small fee to verify their coins, to exchange money from different kingdoms, and basically to make sure they don't get ripped off. And he sums up his whole job with this one perfect line. Trade is heavy, I make it lighter. He's not just weighing metal, he's smoothing out the entire process of doing business.
You know, economists actually have a name for what he's doing. He's lowering transaction costs. Just think of all the time wasted arguing, the effort spent checking every single coin, the risk of getting a fake. The banker absorbs all of that. By being this central, trusted source, he makes every single trade faster, easier, and a whole lot safer for everyone. He's what Rin calls a trust worker.
And this idea of trust is about to take a giant leap forward, because a new customer steps up to the table. He's a traveler, looks totally exhausted, sunburnt, and his pouch of coins is clinking so loudly it's like a dinner bell for every thief in the port. He's got a new kind of problem now, one that's not about the value of his coins, but the sheer danger of carrying them around.
The banker offers him something incredible. Leave your coins here with me, he says. I'll keep them safe. I'll write it down in my book. You can just tell me who to pay, and I'll handle it. And for Rin, this is a mind-blowing moment. She realizes what this means. The physical silver coins don't have to move anymore. The money can stay put.
safe and sound, while the idea of the money, the right to own it, can travel anywhere.
And boom, just like that, deposit banking is born, all from trying to solve a very real human problem, the fear of getting robbed on a long journey. Money is starting to change right before our eyes. It's shifting from being a heavy, physical thing you carry in a pouch to something abstract, an entry in a ledger, a promise held by a person you trust.
But the banker's business model is still evolving. A frantic ship owner runs up, desperate for a loan. He needs to buy cargo before his ship sails with the morning tide. The banker agrees, but there's a catch. The loan has to be paid back with interest. And this immediately starts a debate. A nearby philosopher, probably quoting Aristotle, speaks up. He argues that charging interest is just unnatural. He says it's like money breeding money, making a profit from the money itself instead of from making or growing actual things.
The banker's reply is just brilliant, because he doesn't talk about profit, he talks about service. He breaks it down. First, he says, I give the gift of time. The ship owner gets to buy his cargo right now, not later. Second, I take on the risk. What if his ship sinks? What if the loan never gets paid back? And third, I provide safety for everyone who deposits their money with me. He's making the case that interest isn't just free money, it's the fee he charges for providing these incredibly valuable services.
Okay, so now let's pull the camera way, way back. We're going to zoom out from the individual traders at the port and go straight to the heart of the empire. Because what happens when an entire government runs into money trouble? Well, that's when the very nature of money can be put to the test. We're in an imperial office now, and the officials are staring at their account books with a look of pure panic.
The problem they're facing is huge, but it's also simple. The army needs to be paid, the taxes aren't covering it, and they are flat out running out of silver. So what's the solution? Well, it's a chillingly simple one. An official holds up a bar of pure silver and says, we stretch the silver.
This policy has a name: debasement. What they're going to do is take that pure silver, mix it with cheaper metals like copper, and then mint new coins. These new coins will have the same official stamp, the same face value, but way less actual silver inside. It's a way to turn one pile of silver into what looks like a much bigger pile of money. And it's really important to get this. This usually wasn't some evil plan. It was an act of desperation to keep the whole empire from collapsing.
But what happens when these new stretched coins get back into the real world? What happens when they show up at the port? Well, the consequences of this high-level decision start to ripple through the entire economy. People start to notice. The new coins feel a bit lighter. They don't have the same ring to them. And of course, the banker's scale confirms everyone's suspicions. They're not the same.
Rin then overhears a merchant explaining his personal strategy, and it's just pure, simple logic. He says he's hiding all the old, pure silver coins under the floorboards at his house. Why? Because he knows their value is in the metal itself. But the new debased coins, he spends those as fast as he can because legally everyone has to accept them at their face value.
This behavior is so common, so predictable, that it eventually got its own name, Gresham's Law. And the idea is simple. Bad money drives out good. Whenever you have two types of coins that are legally worth the same, but one is physically more valuable, people will always hoard the good stuff and spend the bad stuff. And the result? All the pure, trustworthy silver coins slowly vanish from circulation.
So, as the good money disappears and prices for everything start to skyrocket, the empire goes into full-on crisis mode. They start trying anything and everything to stop the bleeding. Around 301 CE, they issue price edicts, basically making it illegal to charge more than a certain price for things. When that doesn't work, they just give up on money altogether and start demanding taxes in the form of actual goods, grain, leather, whatever. And finally, they try to do coin reforms, introducing a new coin and hoping to restore faith. But they're just treating the symptoms, not the cause.
And as Rin stands back at the port one last time, watching it all happen, the ships, the merchants, the bankers, it all finally clicks into place. She realizes the economy isn't just people trading, it's so much more than that. It's this delicate ecosystem built on a foundation of trust. It's held together by rules. It has to be connected to the reality of real goods, and it all plays out across time.
This whole era really teaches us that money is, at its heart, a system of promises. And that leaves us with a really big question for next time. The bankers showed us that value can be just a record in a book, not just a chunk of metal. That idea opens the door for paper money. But if money becomes nothing more than a promise, written on a piece of paper,
What in the world keeps that promise honest? We'll dig into that next time. Thanks.
Welcome back. Last time, we watched money evolve into these standardized metal coins, which was a huge step forward for sure, but it also meant that anytime you wanted to do some serious business, you were stuck, literally hauling around heavy, stealable sacks of metal. Today, we're going to dig into the absolutely ingenious solution that changed everything, how money went from being a heavy object to a lightweight promise. So let's just do a quick recap of the problems we ended with. If you were a merchant, metal money was a total nightmare. First, you've got the weight problem. I mean, just imagine trying to pay for a whole shipment of silk with a cart overflowing with bronze coins. Then there's the safety problem. That exact same cart basically puts a giant target on your back for every thief on the road. And finally, you have the trust problem. You'd get to a new city and waste hours, maybe days, arguing over whether their coins were pure or if they'd been clipped. All this stuff, economists call it transaction costs, it's basically all the friction that just gets in the way of making a deal. And these problems were a serious drag on economic growth. And all that frustration led merchants and bankers to a truly revolutionary thought. What if you didn't have to move the actual physical money at all? What if instead you could just move the right to the money? This single idea right here is the spark that kicks off centuries of financial innovation. This is the journey from metal to paper, and believe me, it changes the world. Okay, so our story starts in two of the world's great centers of trade, where these problems were a part of daily life. Our first stop is Baghdad, way back around 850 CE. I want you to really picture a bustling, crowded marketplace. The air is thick with the smell of spices and fresh bread, and you can hear the constant sound of haggling and the clang of hammers from workshops down these narrow streets. It's here that our guide, Rin, finds a cloth merchant named Hassan. And Hassan is nervously clutching this heavy pouch of gold coins, just white-knuckling it. So Rin asks him this really simple question. If you have money, why do you look so worried? And Hassan explains that he's got to pay his suppliers all across the city. Carrying this much gold around, it's just asking for trouble. So what does Hassan do? He takes Rin to a professional money handler to get something called a sock. Now, the easiest way to think of a sock is like a very, very early version of a check. It wasn't money itself, no. It was an instruction written on paper. It basically told a trusted person, hey, give this amount of my gold to whoever holds this note. A really simple but totally brilliant idea. And this is where you see the real genius of the system. Hassan's actual gold coins, they stay locked up, safe and sound with the money handler. Only the piece of paper, the promise, travels through the city. The value gets transferred, but the physical gold never has to move. It was a revolutionary way to take the danger out of doing business. But Rin, she's smart. She asked the essential question. Why would anybody accept a piece of paper instead of actual shiny gold? And the answer is that the paper was only valuable because of the system behind it, a system that was built on two huge pillars, trust and enforcement. See, money handlers lived and died by their reputation, and if anyone dared to commit fraud, the law would come down on them hard. So the paper wasn't the real currency. The real currency was the network of trust that gave that paper all its power. Now, at pretty much the same time, halfway across the world in China, merchants were dealing with the exact same problem, but on a colossal scale. There, we meet a tea merchant named Mei. She's watching workers haul these enormous, ridiculously heavy strings of coins that land with a deafening thud. And as Mei says, money is supposed to help trade, but that's money acting like a rock. The solution the Chinese merchants came up with was, again, just ingenious. They'd drop off their heavy strings of coins at a trusted shop and get a paper receipt. But then they started realizing, hey, why don't we just use these receipts to pay each other? And this paper, which they nicknamed flying money, started circulating just like real currency. And it all worked because of a shared belief that if you wanted to, you could always go back to that shop and get your heavy coins. This, though, exposes the fundamental weakness in any system that's based on promises. What happens if a shopkeeper gets a little greedy and starts writing more paper receipts than they actually have coins in the back room? Well, you get a panic. The second people even suspect that the promise might be empty, that paper becomes totally worthless. This is called the overissuing problem, and it's a huge reason why governments eventually had to get involved and start regulating paper money. So, as trade routes get longer and more complicated, so do the challenges. We're going to jump over to the bustling port cities of medieval Italy now, places like Venice and Genoa. Here, the problem isn't just about paying someone across town. Now you've got to send money to a partner in a completely different country with a totally different currency, and you have to get it across seas that are crawling with pirates.
Rin meets a wool trader named Marco, and he gives her some advice that is, frankly, timeless. Marco needs to pay for wool in a city that's hundreds of miles away, but he knows that walking around with a big pouch of coins is basically a death wish. His solution relies on a powerful new idea that connects these distant cities into a network.
Marco explains this new system, the bill of exchange. Okay, here's how it works. Step 1. Marco pays his local banker, let's call him Banker A, in local money. Step 2. Banker A gives Marco a piece of paper, the bill of exchange. This paper is really just an order for Banker A's partner in that other city, Banker B, to pay Marco's partner. The paper travels safely, the partner shows it to Banker B, and boom, they get paid in the local currency of that city. It's like a bridge of trust built between two banks.
Now, what made the bill of exchange a total game changer was that it packed two powerful ideas into one single document. On the one hand, yeah, it solved the problem of distance and safety, but it also introduced the concept of credit. See, these bills were often written to be paid at a future date, which let merchants buy their goods now and pay for them later. This combination of secure payment and flexible credit, it was like rocket fuel for international trade.
So with all these different paper promises, sacks, receipts, bills of exchange flying all over the world, a new problem starts to creep in. It's not about carrying coins anymore. It's about keeping track of who owes what to whom. The sheer complexity of it all could just be completely overwhelming. A real paperwork nightmare.
In a Venetian counting house, Rin meets a bookkeeper named Elena, and Elena shows her the beautifully elegant solution, double entry bookkeeping. It's a really powerful but simple idea. For every single transaction, you make 2 entries. So if you buy a bolt of cloth, you add cloth to your stuff, and you also subtract silver from your cash. Every credit has a matching debit. It creates a self-balancing system. If the books don't add up, you know right away that there's a mistake somewhere. And Rin, of course, asks the obvious question, what stops someone from just lying in the books? Elena's answer gets right to the heart of this entire story. A business that's built on lies just won't last. The whole system of trade isn't just about numbers. It's about reputation. It's about relationships that are built over years and years. The bookkeeping is just the skeleton that holds all of that trust together. Now, this idea of tracking money as just entries in a book, it reaches its ultimate form in Amsterdam in 1609. Amsterdam was the center of global trade, and merchants were drowning in this chaotic ocean of different currencies from all over the world. The city's solution was to create a public bank. Merchants would deposit all their various coins, and the bank would credit their account with a standard value. And from that point on, they could pay each other with a simple giro payment. Let's just watch how this works. It's amazing. Let's say a spice merchant needs to pay a shipbuilder. The spice merchant has 100 units sitting in their account at the bank. So the merchant just tells the bank, hey, move those 100 units to the shipbuilder's account. And a bank's clerk literally just scratches out one number and writes another. Payment complete. That's it. No coins, no paper, nothing physical moved at all. This is the moment when money becomes pure information. The ledger itself is the money. For our final stop, let's head to London in the 1690s. This is where all the different threads we've been following, the deposit receipts, the trust, the institutional backing, they all come together to create something that every single one of us would recognize today, the banknote. The story actually starts with goldsmiths. They were kind of the original keepers of wealth, like the first safety deposit boxes. People would give them their gold and silver to keep safe, and they'd get a paper receipt. Well, pretty soon, people realized it was a lot easier to just trade the receipts than to go get the gold every time. And Rin notices the most important detail on these notes. The words don't say this is gold, it says, I promise to pay the bearer. That honesty, that admission that this is just a stand-in for the real thing, is what makes the whole system trustworthy. But this system also created a brand new temptation and a massive risk. The goldsmith, who's now basically a banker, starts to realize, hey, not everyone is going to ask for their gold back at the same time. So they figure they can lend out some of that gold that's just sitting there. But that leads to the nightmare scenario for every banker, a bank run. If people lose confidence and everyone shows up at once demanding their gold, the entire system just implodes. So let's just zoom out and look at the incredible journey we've been on. Over nearly 1,000 years, we see this amazing evolution. We went from a simple written order in Baghdad to circulating receipts in China to these complex payment networks in Italy to money as pure information in Amsterdam, and finally to the banknote you might have in your pocket right now. And every single step made trade easier, faster, and bigger.
Our entire journey really boils down to 4 big economic ideas. 1. All of these innovations were about lowering transaction costs, just making business safer and more efficient. 2. They were built on credit, the power of a promise to pay later. 3. They absolutely needed strong institutions, banks, laws, rules, to make the trust part work. And 4, the biggest lesson of all, it all lives on the fragile edge of that trust. If you issue too many promises, the system breaks.
So we'll end with Rin's final reflection, which I think just sums it all up perfectly. Money's journey is a story of it becoming more and more abstract. It starts as a physical thing, an object you can hold. Then it becomes a record, an entry in a book. And finally, it becomes what most of our money is today. Just a promise, an idea, a piece of data moving at the speed of light through a giant global network of trust. What that means for the future? Well, that's a story for another time.
So, last time we talked about how individual merchants started using these clever paper promises to get around the hassle of carrying heavy, risky coins. But what happens when the one who's short on cash isn't just a merchant, but an entire nation at war? Well, the stakes get a whole lot bigger.
And this, right here, is the $1 million, or back then £1 million question, that changed everything. We're not talking about a pouch of gold anymore. We're talking about the entire treasury of a kingdom. See, when a country needs to fund something massive, like a war, it can't just tax people harder and hope for the best. It needs a brand new kind of financial machine.
If you look closely, the problems are basically the same ones the merchants faced, just blown up to a national scale. A merchant worries about his pouch of gold getting stolen. A government treasurer is worried about funding the entire navy. This massive new need for speed, for scale, and for stability, well, it's about to force a whole new level of financial invention. To really see how this all played out, we need to go back in time to a place that was under some serious pressure. A place where getting money wasn't just about profit, it was about survival. Okay, so picture this. London, 1694. You can almost smell the coal smoke. Imagine a government office, papers piled high. There's a treasurer, and he's just staring at the books, and the numbers, they do not add up. The country is at war, and war doesn't wait for tax day. The Navy needs ships, it needs sailors, it needs supplies, and it needs them now. They have to find a way to pull money from the future into the present. And this is the incredible solution they came up with: public debt, made official through something called a government bond. This is one of the most powerful financial ideas ever invented. Instead of just taking money through taxes, the government asks for it as a loan and makes a formal, legally binding promise to pay it all back.
That's all it is, really. It's the government turning to its own citizens, to wealthy investors, and saying, hey, help us out right now, and we will make it worth your while down the road. That little extra for your trouble, that's the interest payment, and it's the key to convincing people to part with their hard-earned cash.
But look, making a promise is easy. Keeping it, especially on a national scale with millions of pounds, requires a super reliable machine. And England's approach here wasn't some crazy gamble. It was all about building a solid, trustworthy institution to manage this whole new system.
And this was the machine they built, the Bank of England. You know, its first job was actually pretty straightforward. It wasn't doing complicated monetary policy or anything like that. It was just the government's money manager. It collected taxes, it paid the bills for things like the Navy, and this is the big one, it organized the huge loans the government needed. It was like the central gear in the whole nation's financial engine.
Now, on top of all that, the bank also started issuing its own paper promises. These were the great-great-grandfathers of the banknotes we use today. And the real power was in those simple words, "I promise to pay." This wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a promise backed by this powerful new institution.
So what made that promise believable? This one rule: convertibility. It was the leash on paper money. It meant that you could trust that piece of paper because you knew at any time you could walk right into the bank and swap it for actual, physical gold or silver. That idea, convertibility, was the bedrock of trust for this whole new system.
But that brings up a really scary question, doesn't it?
This system has a hidden weakness. The bank doesn't actually have enough gold sitting in its vault to pay back every single banknote it has issued all at once. The whole thing works because they assume most people won't ask for their gold back on the same day. But if panic spreads, if that assumption breaks, you get a bank run and chaos.
Okay, so now let's hop across the English Channel to France. While England was slowly, carefully building its financial machine, France was also in a deep financial crisis. But they weren't interested in a slow, methodical fix. No, they were looking for a shortcut, a miracle.
Over in Paris, the problem felt a little different. It wasn't just about government debt. The entire economy just felt crunchy, stuck. You know that feeling when gears are grinding? That was France. There was plenty of wealth, plenty of goods to sell, but there just weren't enough coins flowing around to keep trade moving smoothly. The economic engine was seizing up.
And into this mess walks this incredibly charismatic Scotsman named John Law. And he has this idea that sounds seductively simple. He basically says, look, the economy is like a watermill, but there's not enough water flowing to turn the wheel. If we just add more water, in this case paper money, the wheel will start spinning faster and business will boom.
Well, the French government, desperate for a solution, gave John Law the keys to the kingdom. They let him try his experiment, and what happened next wasn't just an economic recovery. It was one of the most spectacular, insane speculative manias in all of history, the Mississippi Bubble.
So, to understand this bubble, you gotta first know what a share of stock is. It's really simple. It's just a tiny piece of ownership in a company. Law's big project was something called the Mississippi Company, which was supposed to get rich developing France's huge territory in Louisiana. And to raise money for it, he sold these little pieces of ownership to the public.
And this is where things went completely off the rails. See, John Law controlled both the bank that printed the paper money and the company that sold the shares. So he could print a bunch of new banknotes, which made it super easy for people to buy shares in his company. This, of course, drove the share price way up, which created a public frenzy. And that frenzy created even more demand for easy money to buy even more shares. It was a spiral staircase to the moon.
And the numbers, they were just staggering. A single share that started out at 500 livres at its peak went for 18,000. People were becoming millionaires overnight, literally, but the price wasn't connected to reality anymore. It had nothing to do with the actual value of a trading company in America. It was fueled by one thing and one thing only, the belief that someone else would be willing to pay even more for it tomorrow.
Of course, a frenzy like that, built on nothing but pure hype, can't last forever. Eventually, someone gets nervous. Someone decides to cash in their paper profits and asks for real gold. And when that starts to happen, the whole beautiful paper structure begins to melt.
And this quote from a shopkeeper at the time just perfectly captures the anger on the street when the bubble finally burst. People who worked in the real economy, bakers, weavers, people who made actual stuff, they felt totally cheated. They saw a world where fortunes were being made and lost just by trading bits of paper, and it felt completely disconnected from reality.
A few decades later, France would try paper money again. This time, the official promise was that the paper was backed by land seized during the Revolution. But the street reality was the same. That simple phrase says it all. Paper can multiply faster than bread. You can always print paper promises faster than your society can produce real things of value. And when the paper multiplies too fast, each piece becomes worth less and less. That's inflation.
So we have these two wild stories, right? England's slow, steady, careful construction, and France's spectacular boom and bust. They both teach us this really critical lesson. Big financial innovations are almost always followed by some kind of crisis. And it's only out of the rubble of that crisis that we finally write the rules.
So what are the big takeaways from these two very different paths? Well, we learned that government bonds gave countries an incredible new power to do huge things. We saw how banknotes could make an economy run smoother, but only if people trusted them, and that trust was built on a rule like convertibility. And we definitely saw what happens when that leash is cut. You get speculative bubbles and devastating inflation. The biggest lesson of all, it's that the rules of the financial road are almost always written in the wreckage of a crash. Which leaves us with one final, massive question. England created a bank to keep its government in check. France's system spiraled into chaos. Both stories show that the people in charge of the money have an unbelievable amount of power. So, if banks can create these promises out of thin air, and governments can just change the rules whenever they want, who is supposed to be watching them?
Who keeps the entire system from flying off the rails? And that question, that leads us directly into our next explainer, the rise of the central bank. So, last time we saw Rin figure out that money had become this whole complex system of promises, right? Well, now we're going to see what happens when a massive world war suddenly makes every single one of those promises feel like it could break at any moment. All right, so here's where we're headed. We're going to follow Rin's journey, starting in the chaos on the streets of London in 1914. Then we'll move through the tough decisions of the Great Depression and land in a quiet hotel in 1944, where the world literally tried to write a new rulebook for money.
Okay, so picture this. London, 1914. You can almost feel the tension in the air. War is on the horizon. And Rin finds herself just watching this long, stiff, worried line of people snaking out of a bank. The feeling isn't just nerves. It's a sign that the very ground beneath the world of money is starting to tremble.
In this quote, man, it just nails the core of the problem. People are suddenly gripped by this fear that the paper notes in their wallets are, well, just paper. They're losing faith in the promise, and they're all demanding the one thing they believe is truly real, solid gold. You see, this was the fundamental rulebook everyone was operating under. The gold standard meant that your paper money wasn't just a piece of paper. It was basically a claim check. The idea was you could walk into a bank anytime and swap that paper for a guaranteed amount of actual gold. It was the anchor holding everything together.
Now this is where it gets really interesting, because the banking system was suddenly fighting a war on two fronts. You had what's called an internal drain. That's regular folks like you and me panicking and pulling gold out to stick under the mattress. But at the exact same time, you had an external drain. Foreign governments and big investors getting spooked and pulling their gold out of the country altogether. The system was basically bleeding gold from the inside and the outside.
And this, right here, is the moment where central banks really become what we think of them as today. They turn into emergency responders, the money firefighters. They start cranking up interest rates to try and convince people to hold on to their paper money. And the government rushes in to print new notes just to keep the economy from completely freezing solid.
So the war's over, and there's this huge desire to just go back to normal, right? To get back that stability of the old world. So countries, with Britain leading the way, try to rebuild the gold standard. But what they find out is that this system, this beautiful golden cage that's supposed to keep everything safe, can also squeeze the life out of an economy when times get tough. And this timeline, wow, it really lays out just how fast this whole comeback story fell apart. Britain goes all in on gold in 1925, banking on stability. But just a few years later, the world economy is in a tailspin, and the pressure is just immense. Keeping the promise to exchange pounds for gold becomes so destructive to their own people that they have no choice but to break it. The golden cage just snaps.
Okay, hold on a second. This is probably what you're thinking, right? And it's exactly what Rin was wondering. It sounds completely insane. People are struggling, businesses are failing, and you make it more expensive to borrow money? It feels like you're punishing people who are already down, but there was a desperate logic behind it.
So, the logic, even though it feels totally backwards, was all about one thing: defending that gold promise. First, you raise interest rates to make your country look like a great place to park cash. Foreign investors see those high returns and bring their money and their gold in. At the same time, those high rates make it too expensive for people at home to borrow, which slows down the economy. Both of these painful moves were designed to stop the bleeding and protect the nation's gold reserves at all costs.
Okay, let's hop across the pond to the United States, because over there, the crisis morphed into something even more terrifying. It wasn't just about whether your cash was backed by gold anymore. It was about whether the money in your bank account, the money you lived on, even existed at all.
And this is where Rin has her huge aha moment. She realizes that most of the money in the world isn't a pile of coins in a vault somewhere. No, it's an invisible system, a system of promises, all stacked on top of each other, like layers in a cake, connecting you to your bank, to their bank, all the way out.
So listen, this is so important to get. When a bank went bust back then, your money didn't physically disappear. It wasn't like a robber came and stole a bag of cash with your name on it. What actually happened was that a promise was broken. The bank's promise to give you your money back was suddenly worth nothing. And poof, that entire layer of the system, your money, just vanished. So how did America solve this terrifying problem? Well, they came up with a brand new kind of promise, a government promise. In 1933, they created the FDIC to insure people's deposits. This was an absolute game changer, because if the government guarantees your money is safe, you suddenly have no reason to panic and run to the bank. It short-circuited the panic itself.
All right, fast forward to 1944, and the scene is pretty incredible. It's not a battlefield. It's a fancy hotel in a place called Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. You've got delegates from 44 different countries, all of them haunted by the last 30 years of war and economic depression. And their mission is to build a whole new financial system from the ground up, one that could never collapse like that again.
So here's the massive puzzle they were trying to solve. On the one hand, everyone loved the stability of the old gold standard. You knew what a currency was worth. But on the other hand, nobody wanted that painful golden cage that forced countries to destroy their own economies just to keep the promise. What they needed was stability, but with flexibility, an escape hatch.
And what they came up with was frankly brilliant. This table breaks it down perfectly. Instead of every country tying their currency to gold, they would all tie their currencies to the US dollar. And the US dollar would be the only one still tied to gold. But here's the magic trick. The exchange rates were fixed but adjustable. That meant you got predictability day to day, but if your country was in real trouble, you had an option to adjust your currency's value instead of just letting your economy burn.
But, these delegates were smart. They knew a rule book is useless if there's no referee on the field. You can't just have rules. You need institutions with the power to help countries follow those rules, especially when things get tough. So they didn't just write a rule book. They built the organizations to manage it.
And they created two brand new powerful institutions. Think of the IMF as the world's emergency credit card. If a country gets into short-term trouble and can't pay its bills, the IMF can step in with a loan. And then you have the World Bank, which is more like a long-term construction loan, helping to finance huge projects to rebuild countries devastated by war.
And this is really the big takeaway, the lesson Rin finally gets. The whole point of this new system was to build trust. Not trust in one country's promise, but trust in a shared set of rules and institutions. It was all built on the painful, unforgettable memory that when every country just looks out for itself and panics alone, everybody ends up losing together.
Okay, so let's do a quick recap of this incredible journey. Rin saw central banks transform into these emergency money firefighters. She learned that most of the money we use is just layers of promises. She saw how a clever new promise, deposit insurance, could stop a panic in its tracks. And finally, she witnessed the birth of a whole new global system, anchored by the US dollar, with the IMF and World Bank standing guard. A new financial world literally built from the ashes of the old one.
But, and this is a huge but, this whole amazing new system has a single point of failure right at its heart. The entire thing rests on one single promise, the promise from the United States that its dollar will always be convertible to gold. And that leaves us with one massive, looming question. Can one country's promise really be strong enough to hold up the entire world's economy forever?
All right, so in our last explainer, we saw the world's leaders come together to build this thing called the Bretton Woods system. It was a brand new rulebook designed to bring some stability after the absolute chaos of war. But here's the question. What happens when a system built for a broken world has to deal with a rebuilt one? Let's dive in and see how its greatest strength became its fatal flaw.
This right here is the key to understanding everything that happened over the next 30 years. The Bretton Woods system wasn't some kind of epic failure. Not really. It was more like a tragic hero. Its own success, the growth it helped create, ended up causing the very pressures that would tear it apart.
To really get this, let's join our traveler Rin, back in post-war Europe. Imagine it. You can hear the cranes groaning at the ports, see factories coughing back to life. She's watching a German toolmaker, someone trying to get his business back on its feet. He needs parts, he needs materials, he needs to trade.
And that was the reality for basically everyone Rin met. Didn't matter if you were buying French wine, German machines, or oil from the Middle East. The US dollar was the golden ticket. And why? Well, because when every other currency was in ruins, the dollar had a rock-solid promise behind it. You could trade it for gold. And the US had a ton of gold.
Now that is a great question, and the answer is absolutely central to why the system was built the way it was. It wasn't some accident. As Rin digs in, she realizes a bunch of historical events and, deliberate policies all came together to put the world's gold exactly where the new system needed its anchor.
So just look at how this perfect storm came together. First, back in the 30s, U.S. policy basically sucked up all the gold under government control. Then, as war was brewing in Europe, all that gold took what we call a flight to safety. It just flowed to the safest place it could find, which was the United States. So by the time Bretton Woods was signed, the U.S. wasn't just the world's biggest economy, it was also its biggest bank vault.
Okay, so the dollar is the anchor. Got it. But how did other countries connect to it? To figure that out, Rin travels to a French central bank office. You can almost smell it, that old-world mix of paper, ink, and polished wood. She meets an official, a Monsieur Laurent, who's about to explain the very heart of the system's promise.
So, Monsieur Laurent explains that this peg, it's really just a public promise. It's France saying, look, we promise to keep the exchange rate between our franc and the US dollar nice and steady. For a world just coming out of total chaos, that promise of stability was everything. But, making a promise is one thing, keeping it, that's a whole other story.
So how do you defend that promise? Well, Monsieur Laurent explains that if the market starts pushing the value of the franc down, the central bank has to jump in. It takes some of its US dollar reserves, the money it earned from trade, and uses those dollars to buy its own currency, to buy up francs. All that buying creates demand, which pushes the value right back up. And voila, the peg is restored.
I love this analogy because it makes it so easy to picture. Just think of the central bank's reserves as the strength in its leg, and the market, that's the crowd pushing on the door. For years, this whole thing worked pretty well. Monsieur Laurent's leg was strong enough, but Rin could see that the crowd, the global economy, was getting bigger, and it was pushing harder.
Okay, so let's see how this pressure starts to build. Rin is now walking the halls of the brand new International Monetary Fund. The mood is super optimistic, but she starts overhearing economists talking about a fundamental flaw, a deep contradiction, hiding right at the heart of the system she just learned about.
And this is the riddle, right? The entire global economy was rebuilding, it was growing like crazy, and to finance all that trade, it needed more and more US dollars. But the dollar's value was supposed to be tied to a finite amount of gold sitting in a vault. Do you see the problem here? You can't have both.
This is the conflict that became known as the Triffin dilemma. To give that German toolmaker the dollars he needed to trade, the US had to keep pumping dollars out into the world. But the more dollars that flowed out, the more they outnumbered the gold that was supposed to be backing them up. Sooner or later, people like Monsieur Laurent were going to start getting nervous and asking, is this promise for real? By the late 1960s, Rin could see the whole system was just groaning under the strain. She watched governments frantically trying to patch the leaks. They came up with clever fixes, like creating a separate private market for gold, or setting up these currency swap lines between central banks. But these were just band-aids on a deep, fundamental design flaw.
And this timeline just shows the crisis picking up speed. The patches weren't holding. Countries could see the writing on the wall, and they started to get nervous. They began showing up at the U.S. Treasury's gold window, asking to trade their paper dollars for actual, physical gold, just like the promise said they could. A slow-motion bank run had officially begun.
And it all comes to a breaking point on this one day. Just picture Rin sitting in a quiet living room. The only sound is the low hum of a television, that blue-white glow lighting up the dark room. A special address to the nation is about to start.
And there it is. With those words, President Nixon slammed the gold window shut. This act, which we now know as the Nixon shock, single-handedly severed the most important link in the entire Bretton Woods system. The dollar was no longer as good as gold.
In that one moment, this huge, complex geopolitical event becomes something very, very simple and human for Rin and for the entire world. The central promise, the one that had held the global financial system together for more than 25 years, was gone.
So what happens next? What do you do after the promise is broken? Well, what followed was this period of intense uncertainty, as world leaders just scrambled to figure out a new set of rules for a world living after the peg.
By 1973, the world had pretty much stumbled into a totally new era. This slide shows the shift perfectly. We went from a world of fixed, predictable exchange rates, all anchored to gold, to the modern world we live in now, with floating rates where currencies' values change against each other every single day.
It took a few years, but in 1976, the world's financial leaders finally made it official. They all met in Jamaica and formally changed the IMF's rules. They basically acknowledged that the fixed-rate system was dead. A new rule book was written for a new world, one based not on a promise of metal,
but on trust in institutions.
So what are the big takeaways from Rin's journey? Well, we learned that a system built for one era can really struggle to survive in the next. We saw how the dollar's special role as the world's currency created a puzzle that just couldn't be solved. And, maybe most importantly, we saw a fundamental shift in what money is, from a promise of gold to a system built completely on trust.
And that leaves us with a really fascinating question for today, doesn't it? We left the world of gold behind. We entered a world of fiat currencies where value rests entirely on our faith in the governments and central banks that issue them. The Bretton Woods promise was broken under pressure. So what does it take to break this new promise, the promise of trust?
All right, let's jump right back in. In our last journey together, we followed our traveler Rin all the way from simple barter to the post-war era, ending with the Bretton Woods Agreement. You remember that, right? The system that basically pegged the world's currencies to the US dollar, which itself was tied directly to gold. But then, 1971 happened. That link was severed. The gold door just slammed shut. And now, Rin finds herself stepping into a brand new world, one where money isn't backed by a shiny physical treasure anymore. And this, well, this leaves her staring at one massive, absolutely fundamental question. Honestly, it's a question that pretty much defines our entire modern economy. If there's no promise of gold backing it up, what gives our money any value at all? What keeps it from just being, pieces of paper or numbers on a screen? That's the mystery that she and all of us are going to try and unravel today. So, to get some answers, Rin's journey takes her to the late 1970s. This was a time when this new system of money got its first real test. We call it fiat money. All fiat means is that its value comes from a government's decree and, more importantly, our collective trust in it, not from some physical commodity. And let me tell you, that trust was about to get seriously shaken. Rin finds herself standing in a grocery store. It's brightly lit, the shelves are stocked, but the mood? It's just tense. She sees a cashier peeling off old price stickers, slapping new higher ones on top. And then she hears it, a parent at the checkout line, their voice just filled with this slow, grinding exhaustion. That quote right there, that's the feeling of high inflation. It's this personal, deeply frustrating experience where your paycheck just feels like it's shrinking every single time you go to the store. Okay, so when an economy is running too hot like this, when everyone is spending so much that it's outpacing what we can actually produce, which pushes prices up and up, somebody has to step in. And in our story, that someone is the central bank. The best way to think of them is like the economy's firefighter. And back in the late 70s, the fire of inflation was really starting to rage out of control. So how exactly do you fight a fire like that? Well, the main tool in their toolkit is raising interest rates. The logic here is actually pretty straightforward. By making it more expensive for you, me, and businesses to borrow money, the central bank is basically trying to pump the brakes on the economy's spending engine. The whole idea is to slow things down just enough to give supply a chance to catch up with demand. And Rin sees this happen in real time. This isn't just some abstract number on a screen. It has real-world consequences. Higher rates, that means fewer people can afford to take out a mortgage for a new house. It means businesses decide to put those big expansion plans on hold. Hiring starts to slow down, and the entire economic engine just cools off. Now, this can be a painful process for sure, but it's the firefighters' go-to method for stamping out that inflationary fire. Okay, so we've established that the central bank manages the money supply, but that just leads to an even deeper question, doesn't it? Where does all this money actually come from? To figure that out, Rin's journey takes her inside a bank in the 1980s, and it's here she discovers the quiet, almost magical process behind how modern money is born. She watches a banker approve a mortgage for a young couple, and the banker says something fascinating. The money will just show up in your account. And that's the key right there. The bank doesn't go to some big vaults and pull out a stack of cash. No. When a commercial bank, like your local bank, makes a loan, it creates a brand new deposit out of thin air. Just new numbers and an account. And that deposit is new, spendable money. It's wild, but that's how the vast majority of money in our economy actually gets created. So this whole thing reveals that there are really two layers to our money system. Think of it like an iceberg. The spendable money is the part we all see, the bank deposits in our accounts that we use for everything. But underneath the surface, there's this massive foundation of bank money, or what they call reserves. This is a special kind of money that commercial banks hold at the central bank, and they use it to settle huge payments with each other.
So while we're all living our lives up top with our deposits, the entire system's stability really depends on that hidden foundation of reserves.
And this brings us right back to our big question. If money isn't gold and it's mostly just created as loans, what on earth makes us trust it? Rin starts to realize the answer isn't a single thing, it's a whole system. First, the government creates a baseline demand for the currency by making us pay our taxes in it. You have to get it so it has value. Second, you have the central bank, whose entire job is to keep that money useful by fighting inflation and supporting jobs. And third, the banking system itself has all these guardrails, like deposit insurance, to stop panics. It's like a bridge that's not made of gold, but of rules and institutions that we are all constantly maintaining together.
But what happens when that bridge of trust really starts to crack? Rin now finds herself in 2008, and the air is just thick with fear. But this isn't your grandfather's bank run with people lining up on the street. No, this is a modern, digital, invisible run where the banks themselves stop trusting each other. The very plumbing of the financial world was freezing solid. The firefighter, our central bank, had to pull out all the stops. They had to turn on every single hose they had. And this time, they brought out a brand new, incredibly powerful tool. You can see on the timeline a flurry of emergency decisions starting in late 2008, all designed to pump a massive amount of money and, more importantly, confidence back into the system. This new tool was called quantitative easing, or QE.
So what in the world is QE? Well, to put it simply, the central bank starts buying up huge amounts of financial assets, like government bonds, directly from commercial banks. And the key effect here is that this action floods the banking system with those reserves we talked about earlier. The whole goal was to keep credit flowing, to keep money moving, and to prevent the entire financial system from just seizing up and collapsing. It was an emergency measure designed to unfreeze the pipes.
Now, let's jump forward one more time to a crisis that was completely different, the 2020 pandemic. Ren is standing on a street that is just eerily quiet. This time, the problem wasn't that the financial system itself had broken. The problem was that the real world, businesses, shops, travel, was forced to just stop.
The response was incredibly swift and absolutely massive. The central bank slashed interest rates to basically zero and launched another huge wave of QE. But the goal this time was really different from 2008. It wasn't just about saving the banks. It was about building a monetary bridge to help regular businesses and households survive a temporary but complete shutdown of the real economy.
So after seeing all these crises and all these different responses, from the 70s to 2008 to 2020, Rin finally gets it. She understands the core job of a modern central bank. It's a constant, delicate balancing act. If money is too easy and flows too freely, you get that painful inflation we saw in the 70s. But if it's too tight, you get a deep recession where millions of people lose their jobs. The firefighter's job is to constantly tweak their tools to try and keep the economy from swinging too wildly in either of those painful directions.
And all of this entire journey, brings Rin to her final and most profound realization. She closes her eyes, and she imagines herself all the way back in that first, simple valley from the very beginning of her story, with the goat herder, the fisher, and the potter. And she asks herself this powerful thought experiment. What if, just for a day, we tried to run our incredibly complex modern world on simple barter, just like they did in that ancient valley? What would actually happen? Well, the result would be nothing short of total chaos.
I mean, just think about it for a second. How does a cybersecurity expert trade their services directly for a week's worth of groceries? How do you pay a rent with, 0.03 of a car? It's impossible. Our modern world is built on extreme specialization. Now, that doesn't mean that specialized workers don't create real value. Of course they do. It just means their value is so specific that it requires a sophisticated universal tool to be exchanged. And that tool is money. And then it happens. The final piece just clicks into place for Rin. She finally, truly understands. Money itself isn't the treasure. It's not the ultimate goal. It's the social technology. It's the shared language that allows all of us to trade our unique time, our skills, and our products with one another across the globe, efficiently.
Because the real treasure, the real tangible value in any economy has always been these things: the food we eat, the homes that give us shelter, the energy that powers our lives, the tools we build, the skills we have, and the finite human time we use to create all of it. Money is just the incredible invention that lets us connect all of that real value together.
And with that powerful thought, Rin's long journey and our story comes to a close. You know, it's funny. In a way, the YouTube algorithm is kind of like its own little central bank. It expands the distribution of a video when engagement is high, when the money is easy, and it tightens it when nobody interacts, letting a video fall into its own little recession. So if you found some value in this language we shared today and you want to see it circulate, well, you know what to do. Thanks for watching.